Last of Us is a 2013 action-adventure game developed by Naughty Dog and published by Sony Computer Entertainment. Players control Joel, a smuggler tasked with escorting a teenage girl, Ellie, across a post-apocalyptic United States. The Last of Us is played from a third-person perspective. Players use firearms, improvised weapons, and can use stealth to defend against hostile humans, cannibalistic creatures infected by mutated fungus. In the online multiplayer mode, up to 8 players engage in cooperative and competitive gameplay. The development of The Last of Us began in 2009, soon after the release of Naughty Dog's previous game, Uncharted 2: Among Thieves. For the first time in the company's history, Naughty Dog split into 2 teams. While one team developed Uncharted 3, Drake's Deception, the other half developed The Last of Us. The relationship between Joel and Ellie became the focus, with other elements developed around it. Actors Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson portrayed Joel and Ellie, respectively, through voice and motion capture, and assisted creative director Neil Druckmann with the development of the characters and the story. The original score was composed and performed by Gustavo Santaolalla. Following its announcement in December 2011, The Last of Us was widely anticipated. It was released for PlayStation 3 in June of 2013. It received critical acclaim with praise for its narrative, gameplay, visuals, sound design, score, characterization, and depiction of female characters. The Last of Us became one of the best-selling video games of all time, selling over 1.3 million units in its first week and 17 million by April of 2018. The game won year-end accolades, including multiple Game of the Year awards from several gaming publications, critics, and game award ceremonies. It has been cited as one of the greatest video games ever made. Naughty Dog released several downloadable content editions, The Last of Us Left Behind, adds a single-player campaign following Ellie and her best friend Riley. A remastered version, The Last of Us Remastered, was released on PlayStation 4 in July 2014, and a remake, The Last of Us Part 1, was released in September 2022. A sequel, Last of Us Part 2, was released in 2020. Other Last of Us media includes comic book in 2013 and live show in 2014. 2 film adaptations of Last of Us were attempted. A feature film written by Druckmann and produced by Sam Raimi entered development hell, and an animated short film by Oddfellows was cancelled by Sony. Druckmann and Craig Mazepin created a television adaptation of the game starring Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey, which debuted on HBO and HBO Max in January of 2023. While at university, Neil Druckmann had an idea to merge the gameplay of Ico in 2001 in a story set during the zombie apocalypse, like that of George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead in 1968, with the lead character similar to John Hartigan from Sin City. The lead character, a police officer who has been tasked with protecting a young girl. However, due to the lead character's heart condition, players would often assume control of the young girl, reversing the roles. Druckmann later developed it with creating the story of Last of Us. Druckmann views Last of Us as a coming-of-age story in which Ellie adapts to survival after spending time with Joel, as well as an exploration of how willing a father is to save a child. A major motif of the game is that life goes on. This is presented in a scene which Joel and Ellie discover a herd of giraffes, with the concept artist John Sweeney explaining this was designed to reignite Ellie's lust for life after her suffering following her encounter with David. The Infected, a core concept of the game, were inspired by a segment on the BBC nature documentary Planet Earth in 2006, which featured the cordyceps fungi. Though the fungi mainly infected insects, taking control of their motor functions and forcing them to help cultivate the fungus, the game explores the concept of the fungus evolving and affecting humans, as well as the direct results of an outbreak of this infection. The relationship between Joel and Ellie was the focus of the game. All other elements were developed around it. Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson were cast as Joel and Ellie respectively, and provided voice and motion capture performances. Baker and Johnson contributed to the development of the characters. For example, Baker convinced Druckmann that Joel would care for Tess due to his loneliness, and Johnson convinced Druckmann that Ellie should be stronger and more defensive. Following comparisons to actor Elliot Page, Ellie's appearance was redesigned to better reflect Johnson's personality and make her younger. The game's other characters also underwent changes. The character of Tess was originally intended to be a main antagonist, but the team found it difficult to believe her motives. The sexuality of the character Bill was originally left vague in the script, but later altered to further reflect his homosexuality. The Last of Us features an original score composed primarily by Gustavo Santaolalla, along with compositions by Andrew Burish, Anthony Caruso, and Jonathan Mayer. Known for his minimalist compositions, Santaolalla was contacted in early development. He used various instruments to compose the score, including some that he was unfamiliar with, giving a sense of danger and innocence. This minimalist approach was also taken with the game's sound and art design. The sound in Infected was one of the first tasks during development. The team experimented with the sound in order to achieve the best work possible. To achieve the sound of the clicker, they hired voice actress Misty Lee, who provided the sound that Audio Lee Philip Costas described as originating in the back of her throat. The art department took various pieces of work and inspiration, such as Robert Rodolfi's photographs from Hurricane Katrina, which were used as a reference point when designing the flooded areas of Pittsburgh. The art department was forced to negotiate for things they wished to include due to the strong differing opinions from the team during development. Ultimately, the team settled on a balance between simplicity and detail. The cast includes Troy Baker as Joel, The main protagonist, who is from Texas, he works as a smuggler in the Boston quarantine zone. Ellie, played by Ashley Johnson, who is a 14-year-old orphan and other main playable character in the game, and one of the few characters who have never known life before the infection. After surviving a bite from the infected, Ellie is tasked to Joel to be escorted to the Fireflies. Tommy, played by Jeffrey Pierce, who is Joel's brother. Marlene, voiced and played by Merlene Dandridge, is the leader of the Fireflies. Tess, voiced by Annie Wershing, is Joel's smuggling partner and friend. Annie unfortunately lost her life at the age of 45. Bill, played by W.L. Brown, is a survivor and a business partner of Joel and Tess who lives in Lincoln, Massachusetts, near Boston. Henry, played by Brandon Scott, and Sam, played by Najidi Jetta, are brothers Ellie and Joel encounter while trying to escape from a group of hunters in Pittsburgh. Henry is 25 years old, while Sam is 13. And Nolan North is David, a leader of a group Ellie encounters at the lakeside resort. Now, where do I even begin to review such a phenomenal game like this? From its emotional character development, its story and its subtext, its wonderful visuals and sound design, and the depiction here of a female and the LGBT characters, for me it is one of the most significant games ever made. This is a complete and utter masterpiece. The story is incredibly riveting and emotionally resonant, all playing off the backdrop of this absolutely horrific situation that the world now finds itself in. The game is also beautifully paced. There really is a sense of time elapsed and the journey travelled along every step of the way, as you are now taken into this world, post this terrible fungus infection called cordyceps, which has now taken over the world and destroyed everything we come to know. You often find yourself sitting back and thinking, goodness gracious, what if this happened to me? How would I cope? How would I deal with this? There is a sense of dread whilst playing this, and of course you're waiting in fear for the next attack to come out of nowhere. It's super intense, it's very violent, and it's certainly not for the faint of heart. It's not just about the action sequences and dealing now with the infected, it's about the characters, particularly here the relationship between Joel and Ellie. It's a poignant one, and herein lies the heart of this fantastic game and story. You can see they develop these characters with a lot of patience and skill, appreciating the emotional value and gravitas their story would take in making this a special piece of work. The relationship between the two is genuine and emotional. And I love how they go from not trusting each other, not knowing each other, to really beginning to love each other in a different kind of way, in a friendship, in a nurturing, caring way. I love the game's combat and a refreshing difference from other games, as there's a sense of vulnerability. There's a sense of realism in the way you fight, in that you need to be stealthily, use your weapons wisely, and sometimes rely on pure chance. The enemies in this feel human. There's an emotional value to that. And when you kill them, it's not like you feel good. It's not like you're just killing a non-playable character. There's an emotional weight to it almost. The art design is absolutely outstanding. And the visual representation of the post-apocalyptic world was fantastic, yet in the same breath, heartbreaking as well. As you see cities that once stood tall, now destitute, in full decay. The sound design, of course, is also so important to this gameplay, and just adds to the sort of tension and unnerving feelings that you have whilst playing. One thing that had to stand out for me as well is the lack of sexualized female characters. It offers a refreshing sort of anti-sexism and regressive gender attitudes that many blockbuster games, of course, have put forward. Here, each character is almost equal. Everybody's in the same boat, per se. For me, like Ellie sometimes feels strong, sometimes she's vulnerable, but she's never a cliche, she's never dull, she's never the damsel in distress. And both characters in Joel and Ellie are completely flawed and can be unlikable at times, but in other ways can be so likable as well. Even the little touch here of the character of Bill being gay is one of the most intriguing and fantastic choices that the game makes, because it's subtle, it's just hinted at, and he's just another person surviving who happens now to have had a life before this. Naughty Dog has made some of the greatest games ever, from of course the phenomenal Uncharted series as well, but Last of Us is deep, it's unique, and it's riveting. If you look beyond all the violence, gore, and the so-called zombie apocalypse, here you have a deep, fantastic, beautifully told story between a man trying to survive and a young girl who may be the answer to his salvation. Even when you head in further and try to research the actual cordyceps fungi and how it takes over people, and how the idea of the development of people being now possessed by this fungus, but still having a conscience when they are newly infected, and then slowly but surely they develop into these monstrous beings like clickers and bloaters. Well, it's just so creative, dark, and fascinating. It's one of those games where I wanted to understand the mythology. I've read so much about it, I've gone into so much detail just to understand it further, and that alone shows me how powerful this game is and how beautifully written and what a masterpiece it truly is. It's one of those games that will leave you haunted. It will stay with you forever. There are times when you just don't even want to be alone whilst playing it. But then the story captivates you and takes it on its journey as you now invest fully and completely in these wonderful, fully realized characters. And even though, of course, it is a work of fiction, for me there is a sort of grounded realism in the story, and that it is not so far-fetched, and we can draw complete parallels with the own pandemic that we had to suffer through in 2020, namely the COVID-19 pandemic. How governments took control, like Fedra does in this game. How there was a complete and utter breakdown in society. How some of us were losing our minds, per se. Of course, the story takes it much further along. But it is a fascinating and interesting insight into the breakdown of human society. How people break off into their various factions and do whatever they feel is right to survive. It's a fascinating look into a post-apocalyptic world where we are at war with a disease that we cannot control nor fight. From its groundbreaking characterization, phenomenal storytelling, fantastic gameplay, it is a game that you will never forget. The Last of Us gets a 10 out of 10.